radical candor. And in order to explain to you what I mean by radical candor, I'm going to tell you a story about a time that my boss criticized me. I had just joined Google and was going to give a presentation with Gokul, actually, to the founders and the CEO about how the AdSense business was doing. And for me, working at Google, it wasn't just a new job. It was actually like the resurrection of a dream. I had started a software company 4 years before that had failed, unfortunately, recently. And part of the reason why I started that company was that I wanted to create a workplace that was like a bullshit-free zone, where people actually loved the work they did and at least enjoyed working together. And so it was very sad to me when the company failed for a number of reasons, including that one. And the first time I stepped on Google's campus for interviews, the first time I went there, the joy that people took in the work that they did felt almost palpable to me. And the respect that people showed, people like Gokul and Greg, showed each other it was almost a tangible thing. And I was really curious to understand how the leaders at Google had pulled this off. Did you have to have the world's greatest business model and money spouting from the earth? Or were there some things that any of us could do? Luckily, there's some things that any of us can do, and I'll tell you about those today. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying this was an important meeting to me. I wanted to make a good impression. And so I walked in feeling a little nervous, and happily, the AdSense business was on fire. And when Greg and Gokul and I told Larry, Sergey, and Eric how many publishers we had added over the last few months, Eric almost fell off his chair and said, "What resources can we give you to help you continue this amazing success?" So I sort of felt like the meeting went okay. After it was over, my boss said, "Why don't you walk back to my office with me?" And I said, "Sure," sort of expecting a little bit of a victory lap. And she started telling me about the 4 or 5 things she liked about the presentation, how impressed she was with how the business was doing. But I was getting more and more nervous as we were walking because I sort of had a feeling the other shoe was about to drop. But I had no idea what I had done wrong, so this was an uncomfortable moment. And finally she said, "But," and I sort of held my breath, "you said a lot." And I was like, "Oh, no big deal, I know I do that." It didn't really seem like, who cared if I said a lot when I had a tiger by the tail? So she said, "Was it because you were nervous?" "No, nervous, not me." And then she said, "Would it help if Google hired a speaking coach for you so that you could learn not to do this?" And I said, "I'm really busy. It just doesn't seem like the most important thing in the world." And she said, "Kim, when you do that thing with your hand, I can tell I'm not really getting through to you. I'm going to have to be more clear here. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid." That got my attention. Now, a lot of people would have said that it wasn't very nice to say that I sounded stupid, but in fact, it was the kindest thing that she could possibly have done for me. If she hadn't said it just that way, I would have kept blowing her off. I wouldn't have addressed the problem, and it would have, what a silly thing to let trip you up at a job. I still do it, but not as much. It would be a total state of paralysis if I hadn't gone to that coach that Cheryl sent me to. So how was Cheryl, it sounds like kind of a simple thing to say, you need to correct something, but it very rarely happens. So what I did was I tried to operationalize what my boss was so good at so that I could do it and so that I could teach the people who worked for me to do it and now teach all of you to do it. So I'm going to boil it down to sort of a very simple framework. On the vertical axis is what I call the give a damn axis. And part of the reason why Cheryl was able to say to me so bluntly, "You sounded stupid," was that I knew that she cared personally about me. She had done 1,000 things that showed me that. When I first moved to California from New York and I didn't know anybody, I didn't have any friends, she invited me to join her book group. When I had a family member who got very sick, she was totally clear with me that my first responsibility was to my family and I should just leave and go and deal with that, and she had me covered at work. And she did that not just for me, but for all of the people who worked for her. So caring personally is going to make it much easier to do the next thing that you have to do as a good boss, which is to be willing to piss people off. Colin Powell said, leadership often means being willing to piss people off. So the other thing that Cheryl had to do was to be willing to challenge me directly. Now, this is something that a lot of us are very reluctant to do. Since the time we learned to speak, our parents told us some version of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all, right? Anybody ever get told that? And now, as soon as you become a boss for the first time, or even if you've already been managing people for 25 years, it's now your job to say it. And I would argue it's not just your job, it's actually your moral obligation. John Stuart Mill explains it very well. He says that the source of everything respectable in man, either as an intellectual or as a moral being, is that his errors are corrigible. The whole strength and value of human judgment depends on the one property that it can be set right when it is wrong. So it was not just my boss's job to tell me that I sounded stupid. It was actually her moral obligation to me, right? So that is what, at the intersection of caring personally and challenging directly, is radical candor, right? So how can you be radically candid? If an acronym helps you, radical candor is HIP. It's humble, it's helpful, it's immediate, it's in person, it's in private if it's criticism, in public if it's praise, and it doesn't personalize. My boss didn't say, you are stupid or you're a moron. She just said, you sounded stupid when you said right? There's a big difference between the two. However, that takes a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of intentionality in your day. So if you can't offer radical candor, the second best thing you can do is to be an asshole. Now, let me be totally clear. None of you is shooting for second best. I am second to none in my dislike of jerks, so I'm not advocating that you all